The silence of the 40th floor was a living thing. It had a weight, a texture, a low hum that vibrated just at the edge of hearing. For the past 4 years, this silence had been the primary companion of my evenings. It was the sound of my life, orderly, predictable, and profoundly lonely. My job was data migration, a title so bland it effectively ended conversations before they began. I translated the digital ghosts of one dead company into the living architecture of another. It was quiet work for a quiet man. Most nights, I was the last one out, a solitary figure moving through the darkened, cavernous space of Sterling Corp. My keyboard clicks the only percussion in the vast, empty symphony hall of the office. My routine was a ritual honed to minimalist perfection. At precisely 11:45 p.m., I would run the final script. While it executed, I'd rinse my coffee mug in the kitchenette, the splash of water a startling intrusion into the quiet. I'd pack my worn leather satchel, sliding my laptop into its sleeve with a soft zip. Then, the walk. Down the long, blue-carpeted corridor, past the empty glass-walled offices of executives I'd never met, to the elevator bank. And there, waiting for me in the lobby 40 floors below, was the only part of my day that felt unpredictable, the only part that made my heart perform a strange, stuttering rhythm against my ribs. Marcus. He was the night security guard. He'd been here for about a year, replacing a portly, cheerful man named Stan who'd retired to Florida. Stan had been nice. Marcus was different. He was a man carved from stillness and quiet observation. Tall, with a solid build that his crisp, gray uniform couldn't conceal, he moved with an economy of motion that suggested a deep, coiled strength. He had dark, closely cropped hair and a jaw that looked like it could crack walnuts. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were a deep, clear brown, and they saw everything. When he looked at you, it felt like he was taking a full inventory of your soul. Our interactions were fleeting, barely 30 seconds a night. I'd step out of the elevator, and he'd be there at the large, sterile security console, his gaze lifting from the bank of monitors. "Leo," he would say. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. It was a voice that seemed too large for the echoing marble lobby. "Marcus," I'd reply, my own voice always sounding thin and reedy in comparison. He'd nod, a small, sharp movement of his head. Sometimes, a ghost of a smile would touch the corner of his mouth, a fleeting thing that never quite reached his eyes. And that was it. I'd walk across the polished floor, push through the heavy glass doors, and step out into the cool, indifferent city night. The entire exchange was nothing, a common courtesy. But for me, it was everything. It was a pinprick of light in the vast, monochrome landscape of my existence. I was, to put it plainly, pathetically and hopelessly infatuated. It was a silent, secret ache I carried in my chest, a foolish, schoolboy crush that a man of 32 had no business entertaining. He was, by all available evidence, straight. There was a faded photo tucked into the corner of his monitor console, a pretty, smiling blonde woman. I assumed it was a wife or girlfriend. He wore no ring, but that meant little. He carried himself with a casual, masculine confidence that felt worlds away from my own quiet, anxious energy. He was the stoic protector, the steady hand, and I was just another office drone, a fleeting face he had to log out at the end of the night. Tonight, however, was different. A critical server had crashed, and I'd been on the phone with a frantic team in Bangalore until nearly 2 a.m. The building was more than empty. It felt ancient, a tomb of commerce sleeping under the hum of fluorescent lights. When I finally packed my bag, my body ached with a weariness that went bone deep. My reflection in the dark glass of the executive boardroom looked pale and haunted. I pushed the elevator button, the plastic circle glowing a soft, hopeful white. The doors slid open with a gentle whoosh, revealing the empty, stainless steel box. I stepped inside, the scent of industrial cleaner and something faintly metallic filling my nose. I turned to press the L for lobby, but a hand, broad and steady, stopped the doors from closing. Marcus stepped in. My breath hitched. In a year, this had never happened. He always waited in the lobby. He never rode the elevators unless there was an incident. "Trouble?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. He pressed the lobby button himself, his finger brushing the back of my hand. A jolt, small but electric, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. "Just doing a final sweep," he said, his voice filling the small space, making it feel even smaller. One of the cleaners on the 35th reported a flickering light. Figured I'd check it on my way down. He stood beside me, not against the opposite wall as a stranger would. The proximity was overwhelming. I could smell him, not cologne, but something clean and subtle, like fresh laundry, soap, and the faint, bitter scent of the strong coffee he always had in a thermos at his desk. I was hyper-aware of the space between us, a gulf of a few inches that felt charged with a strange energy. I stared resolutely at the floor indicator, watching the numbers descend. 39, 38, 37. I could feel his gaze on me. I didn't have to look to know it. It was a physical sensation, a warmth spreading across the side of my face. I risked a glance. He wasn't looking at my face, but at my satchel. "Working late, even for you," he observed. It wasn't a question. "Big project," I mumbled, my eyes fixed on the numbers again. 34, 33. Please hurry up. Please just get to the lobby. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. And then it happened. Between the 31st and 30th floors, there was a violent, groaning shudder. The elevator jerked to a halt, a sickening lurch that sent me stumbling forward. An arm shot out, Marcus's arm, and pressed flat against my chest, steadying me. His hand was a furnace, the heat of it seeping through my thin cotton shirt, branding my skin. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging us into absolute, suffocating darkness. A moment later, the emergency lights kicked in, casting the small space in a dim, eerie red glow. My first thought was a purely logistical one. Great. Stuck. My second thought was far more potent, far more terrifying. I'm stuck. With him. The silence that followed the shudder was a different kind of silence than the one I knew on the 40th floor. This was thick, close, and humming with a new, anxious tension. My own breathing sounded impossibly loud in the confined space. The emergency fan whirred softly overhead, a tiny, inadequate sound against the profound stillness. Marcus removed his hand from my chest, but I could still feel the phantom pressure of it, a warm handprint over my wildly beating heart. He didn't seem panicked. Of course he didn't. He moved with that same deliberate calm, the red light carving sharp angles on his face, making him look like a statue of a Roman god. He reached for the control panel, his shoulder brushing mine. The contact was brief, but it sent another wave of heat through me. "Well," he said, his voice a low, unbothered rumble that seemed to absorb the ambient fear. "That's not ideal." He pressed the emergency call button. A crackle of static, then a tinny, disembodied voice. "Security desk. What's your emergency?" "Hey, Brenda. It's Marcus. I'm in elevator 4 with one of the tenants. We're stuck somewhere around the 30th floor." "Oh, geez, Marcus. Again? That car was just serviced." "Okay, I'll call maintenance. You know how this goes. Might be a while." "Understood. Keep me posted." He released the button. The static cut out, and the heavy silence rushed back in. "Might be a while," he repeated, turning to face me fully. The red light cast his eyes in shadow, making them impossible to read. "Sorry about this, Leo." He knew my name. I mean, of course he knew my name. He said it every night. But hearing it in this context, in this small, dark, intimate space, felt different. It felt personal. "Not your fault," I managed to say, my throat dry. I leaned back against the cool metal wall, trying to create a distance that the elevator's dimensions simply wouldn't allow. He mirrored the movement, leaning against the opposite wall, our knees only a foot or so apart. And so we waited. I became an expert in the geography of Marcus in those first few minutes. I studied the way the cheap emergency light caught the sharp line of his jaw, the slight stubble that shadowed his chin. I watched the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest, the fabric of his gray shirt straining slightly across his broad shoulders. He had his hands in his pockets, a casual posture that was completely at odds with the frantic energy surging through my own veins. I was a bundle of live wires, and he was the calm, grounding earth. My mind, an engine built for overthinking, kicked into high gear. I analyzed every shift of his weight, every quiet breath. When he rubbed the back of his neck, was it a sign of frustration? When his eyes swept over me, was it with annoyance or something else? I was a detective searching for clues in a case that existed only in my own head. The primary evidence was the space between us, a space that felt both vast and non-existent. He broke the silence first. You never told me what you do up there. The question was so simple, so direct, it caught me off guard. Oh, it's data migration. Not very exciting. Data migration, he repeated, tasting the words. He tilted his head. Sounds quiet. It is. I gave a short, humorless laugh. The silence is the best part of the job. I get that, he said, and his voice was softer now. People think this job is all about action, about stopping things. Mostly, it's just about watching. Listening to the building breathe. Listening to the building breathe. The phrase was almost poetic. It was not something I would have expected from him. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the stoic security guard, but a man who understood the language of silence as well as I did. A flicker of connection, unexpected and potent. I never thought of it like that, I admitted. Most people don't, he said. His eyes met mine across the dim, red space, and for the first time, he didn't look away. The gaze held, steady and unwavering. It felt less like an inventory and more like an invitation. My heart did that stupid, stuttering thing again. I had to look away, focusing on a scuff mark on my shoe as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the things we weren't saying. The air grew thick, heavy. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, a stark contrast to the cold metal at my back. I clasped my hands together, my knuckles white, trying to anchor myself. Another 10 minutes crawled by. I was acutely aware of the absurdity of the situation. Here was the man who occupied 90% of my waking thoughts, trapped in a box with me, and I was utterly incapable of forming a coherent sentence. My internal monologue was a frantic, screaming mess of hope and fear, while my external self was a statue of awkward silence. He shifted, his boot scraping softly against the floor. He pulled one hand from his pocket and reached into the inside of his uniform jacket. For a wild, insane moment, I thought he was reaching for a weapon. He pulled out a small, foil-wrapped bar. Protein bar, he offered, holding it out to me. Dinner of champions. I stared at the bar. It was such a normal, mundane gesture. So human. It broke the spell of my anxiety, just for a second. No, thanks. I'm good. He shrugged and tore it open, the crinkling of the wrapper an explosive sound in the quiet. He took a bite, chewing slowly and deliberately. I watched the movement of his jaw, the way his throat worked as he swallowed. Every small detail felt magnified, hyper-real. So, he said, after swallowing, data migration. You sit in front of a computer all night, moving stuff? I almost smiled. Basically, digital stuff. Moving it from one place to another. Making sure none of it gets lost or broken on the way. Sounds important. It feels abstract. I confessed, surprised at my own honesty. Like I spend 10 hours a day moving ghosts around. Sometimes I wonder if any of it is real. He stopped chewing and looked at me, his expression serious. The red light made it hard to be sure, but I thought I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. I know what you mean. I watch these monitors all night. Hundreds of empty rooms, empty hallways. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only person left in the world. There it was again. That connection. A shared sense of isolation. A shared language of loneliness. He wasn't just the handsome, stoic guard. He was a man who understood the particular solitude of the night shift, the feeling of being a ghost in the machine of the sleeping city. Yeah, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Me too. We were quiet again, but this time it was a comfortable silence, a shared understanding. He finished his bar, carefully folding the wrapper into a neat square and tucking it into his pocket. An act of precision, of order. It was so quintessentially him. The elevator gave another lurch, less violent this time, more of a groan, and settled again with a soft bump. I flinched, my hand flying out to brace myself against the wall. His hand covered mine. It wasn't a grab or a steadying gesture. It was a placement. His hand, large and warm, simply settled over my knuckles where they were pressed against the cold steel. He didn't squeeze. He didn't move. He just rested it there. Time seemed to stop. The whir of the fan faded away. The red light seemed to dim. All of my senses narrowed to that single point of contact. The warmth of his palm, the slight callous texture of his fingertips, the sheer weight of his hand covering mine. It was a gesture that could have been interpreted a dozen ways. A simple, comforting touch in a stressful situation. A friendly reassurance. But my heart, that foolish, hopeful organ, chose to interpret it as something more. I am not a man of action. I am a man of observation, of analysis. I live in my head, in the safe, predictable world of code and logic. But in that moment, with his hand covering mine, a reckless impulse surged through me. I turned my hand over, my palm facing his, our fingers brushing. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers slowly, deliberately, laced with mine. The world tilted on its axis. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful gasp. This was not ambiguous. This was not something I could explain away. This was a direct, undeniable communication. His thumb stroked the back of my hand, a slow, mesmerizing rhythm that sent fire racing up my arm and straight to my core. I stare at our joined hands, bathed in the lurid red glow. His hand is so much larger than mine, his skin darker, the knuckles prominent. My own hand looks pale, slender, almost fragile in his grasp. It feels right. It feels like a piece of me that has been missing has just been slotted into place. I finally find the courage to lift my eyes to his. His face is close. He has moved, I realize, or maybe I have. The distance between us has shrunk to mere inches. The air is thick with his scent, with the unspoken question that hangs between us. His eyes are dark, intense, and they are searching mine for something. For permission. For confirmation. Leo, he says, and my name is a rough, velvet sound in the stillness. I can't speak. I can only nod, a tiny, jerky movement. He leans in, and the world dissolves into a kaleidoscope of sensation. The first touch of his lips is soft, hesitant, a question. He tastes faintly of coffee and the sweet protein bar. The stubble on his chin is a gentle abrasion against my skin. I part my lips on a silent gasp, and that is all the invitation he needs. The kiss deepens, and it is nothing like the frantic, desperate encounters I had imagined in my loneliest moments. It is slow and sure and deep. It is a conversation without words, a story of longing and discovery. His other hand comes up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking along my cheekbone, holding me steady as if he fears I might bolt. As if he doesn't know that I have been waiting for this my entire life. For a moment of connection so profound it rewrites the code of my own lonely existence. This is real. This is happening. I am kissing the night guard in a stuck elevator, and it feels more real than anything I have ever experienced. When he finally breaks the kiss, he doesn't pull away. He rests his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. I keep my eyes closed, trying to memorize the feeling of his hand in mine, his palm against my cheek, the solid presence of him in the darkness. Been wanting to do that, he murmurs, his voice a low vibration against my skull, for a very long time. My eyes snap open. What? A small smile, the first genuine one I've ever seen from him, touches his lips. It transforms his face, softening the hard lines, making him look younger, almost vulnerable. Every night, I watch you walk out those doors. I kept telling myself to say something more than just your name. I thought you were. I trail off, unable to say the word. Straight. The photo on his desk. He seems to read my mind. My sister, he says simply. She lives in Oregon. Sends me pictures of her kids. I like to have her face around. He pauses, his thumb stroking my cheek again. There's no one else, Leo. Hasn't been for a while. Relief washes over me, so potent and overwhelming it makes me dizzy. All my assumptions, all my careful observations and logical deductions were wrong. I had built an entire narrative around a photograph of his sister. The irony was almost painful. Before I can respond, the elevator gives a tremendous shudder, and with a loud clang, the main lights flicker on, flooding the small space with harsh, white fluorescence. We jump apart like startled teenagers, our hands disconnecting, the spell broken. The car begins to move, its descent smooth and steady now. We stand on opposite sides of the elevator, not looking at each other. The sudden brightness feels like an interrogation lamp. I can feel the blush burning on my cheeks. My lips tingle. My entire body is thrumming with a strange, new energy. What just happened? Was it real? The mundane reality of the moving elevator, the bright lights, the familiar hum, It all conspires to make the last 20 minutes feel like a fever dream. The doors slide open to the lobby. Brenda, the overnight operator, a stout woman with a cloud of frizzy gray hair, is standing there, her face etched with concern. "Oh, thank God. You boys okay? Maintenance is on their way, but it looks like the system just rebooted itself." "We're fine, Brenda," Marcus says, his voice back to its usual calm, professional tone. He steps out of the elevator, all business. False alarm. I follow him out, my legs feeling unsteady. I avoid Brenda's gaze, mumbling a thank you as I hurry towards the main doors. My mind is a whirlwind of confusion and panic. It was a dream. A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and a faulty elevator. He's back to being Marcus the security guard, and I'm back to being Leo the office drone. The bubble has burst. I push through the glass doors, the cool night air a shock to my system. I just want to get home, to hide in my quiet apartment, and try to process what, if anything, just happened. "Leo." His voice stops me on the sidewalk. I turn around slowly. He's standing there, just outside the doors, his hands in his pockets. The city lights cast long shadows on the pavement. He looks just as he always does, solid and unreadable. I start, but I don't know what to say. "Did that just happen? Did I imagine you kissing me?" He closes the distance between us in 3 long strides. He doesn't touch me. He just stands in front of me, his presence blocking out the rest of the sleeping city. "My car's this way," he says, his voice low, meant only for me. "Let me give you a ride." It's not a question. It's a statement, a reassurance, a continuation. And for the first time in a very long time, I don't overthink it. I don't analyze it. I just nod. "Okay," I say, and I follow him into the night. Marcus's car was not what I expected. I'd pictured something practical and anonymous, a sensible sedan. Instead, he led me to an old, beautifully maintained Ford pickup truck, the color of a midnight sky. It was parked in a reserved spot near the building's entrance. The cab was clean but lived in, smelling faintly of coffee and motor oil, a scent that was somehow deeply comforting and entirely masculine. He opened the passenger door for me before walking around to the driver's side, a small act of courtesy that felt significant. The drive to my apartment was mostly silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the one in the elevator. The awkward, post-kiss tension had dissipated, replaced by a quiet hum of anticipation. The city slid by in a blur of neon and streetlight, a world outside the warm, safe cocoon of the truck's cab. I watched his hands on the steering wheel. They were large and capable, knuckles slightly scarred, movements sure and steady as he navigated the empty streets. These were the hands that had held mine, that had cupped my face. The reality of it was still sinking in, a slow, warm tide rising in my chest. He didn't ask for directions. Of course he didn't. He knew my address from my employee file. The thought should have been unsettling, but it wasn't. It just felt like another piece of the puzzle falling into place. He had been watching me, just as I had been watching him. This wasn't a spontaneous event born of a strange situation. It was the culmination of a year of unspoken things. He pulled up in front of my building, a modest, pre-war walk-up in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. He put the truck in park, but left the engine running, its low rumble a steady heartbeat in the quiet street. The moment of truth. This was where he would say goodnight, and I would be left to wonder if I had dreamed the entire thing. I unbuckled my seatbelt, my hands fumbling slightly. "Well, thanks for the ride," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally high. I reached for the door handle. "Leo," his voice stopped me again. I turned to look at him. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, his face was serious, his eyes intent. Don't what? Don't run," he said quietly. "Don't go up there and convince yourself this didn't happen." His perception was so acute, it was almost painful. He saw right through me, right to the scared, overthinking core of me. He knew my instinct was to retreat, to analyze the event until it was stripped of all its magic, to file it away as an anomaly. I wasn't. I started to lie, but the words died in my throat. I was. That was exactly what I was going to do. He reached across the console and gently took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine again. The connection was just as electric as it had been in the elevator. Solid. Real. "I'm not good with words," he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "I see things. I watch. And I've been watching you for a long time. I see how you carry yourself. Like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. I swallowed hard, unable to speak. He saw me. He truly saw me. The shoe isn't going to drop, he continued, his voice a low, earnest rumble. Not with me. What happened in that elevator? That was real. For me, anyway. Was it real for you? The question hung in the air between us, simple and direct and terrifying. It demanded an honesty I wasn't used to, a vulnerability I had spent years building walls to protect. I looked at our joined hands, then back up at his face. The hope and uncertainty in his eyes mirrored my own. Yes, I whispered, the word a puff of air. It was real. The tension in his shoulders seemed to melt away. A slow smile spread across his face, that genuine, heart-stopping smile. Good, he squeezed my hand. Now, are you going to invite me up for what has to be the worst cup of coffee in this city? Or am I going to have to sit out here all night? A laugh bubbled up out of me, a genuine, startled sound of joy. The relief was so immense it felt like I could float away. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. My coffee is not that bad, I protested, a smile stretching my own face. We'll see about that, he said, his eyes twinkling. He finally let go of my hand, and the loss of contact was a physical ache. Go on. I'll find a parking spot. I got out of the truck and walked up the 3 steps to the front door of my building, fumbling for my keys. I could feel his eyes on me the whole time, a warm, protective presence at my back. I unlocked the door and glanced back. He was parallel parking the big truck with an effortless grace, his silhouette strong and steady behind the wheel. He gave me a small nod, a promise. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, flicking on the lights. The space was a reflection of me, neat, orderly, and a little impersonal. Books were stacked in precise piles, furniture was functional and plain, and the walls were mostly bare, save for a few generic prints I'd bought online. It was a space for existing, not for living. Seeing it now, through his eyes, I felt a sudden pang of self-consciousness. It was a lonely apartment. I went straight to the kitchen and started making coffee, my hands moving on autopilot. The familiar ritual was calming. The scoop of beans, the whir of the grinder, the gurgle of the machine. By the time I heard the soft knock on the door, a fresh pot was brewing, its rich aroma filling the small space. I opened the door, and there he was. He seemed to fill the doorway, his broad shoulders framed by the narrow opening. He had taken off his uniform jacket and had it slung over his shoulder. In just the gray button-down shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, he looked less like an official and more like a man. A very handsome, very solid man who was standing in my doorway at 3 o'clock in the morning. He stepped inside, his eyes sweeping over the apartment. I braced myself for a comment, a judgment, but he just nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. It's quiet, he said. It wasn't a criticism. It was an observation. It's my specialty, I replied, trying for a lightness I didn't feel. He walked over to my bookshelf, his fingers ghosting over the spines of the books. You read a lot. Helps pass the time. I prefer to build things, he said, turning back to me. With my hands. Furniture. Fix up old engines. Something solid you can touch at the end of the day. We were so different. The man of abstract ghosts and the man of solid objects. And yet, we had found each other in the quiet spaces, in the lonely hours of the night. The coffee maker gave a final, wheezing sigh. Coffee's ready, I announced, grateful for the distraction. And for the record, it's a single-origin Guatemalan bean. It's excellent. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that filled my small kitchen. All right, coffee snob. I'll be the judge of that. I poured 2 mugs, my favorite worn ceramic one for me, and a plain white one for him. I handed him his, our fingers brushing again. This time, the jolt was familiar, a pleasant hum of recognition. He took a sip, his eyes closing for a moment as he savored it. Okay, he admitted, opening his eyes. They were smiling. It's good coffee. I told you. We stood there in the kitchen, drinking our coffee, the silence stretching between us again. But it was a new silence, a silence of discovery. I was watching him, and he was watching me, and there was no pretense left. So, I said, my courage bolstered by the coffee and the sheer unreality of the situation. Marcus, what happens now? He set his mug down on the counter and took a step closer to me. The space between us vanished. He was so close I could feel the heat coming off his body. He raised a hand, not to my face this time, but to my chest, right over my heart. I could feel my own pulse hammering against his palm. "Now," he said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate rumble that made my knees weak. We stopped watching, and we start seeing. He leaned down and kissed me again. This kiss was different from the one in the elevator. There was no desperation, no frantic discovery. This was slow and deep and full of a quiet certainty. It was a kiss that promised sunrises and lazy mornings and a future filled with this easy, comfortable silence. It was the end of my loneliness and the beginning of everything else. It was the feeling of coming home. The sun was just beginning to cast a pale, gray light through my apartment window when I woke up. For a moment, I was disoriented. My bed felt different, warmer, more solid. Then I became aware of the heavy arm draped over my waist, the soft, steady sound of breathing next to my ear. Marcus. It hadn't been a dream. The memory of the past few hours washed over me in a warm, dizzying wave. The elevator, the truck, the coffee, the slow, gentle way he had undressed me, the feeling of his skin against mine. It was all real. He was real. He was here, in my bed. I lay perfectly still, too afraid to move and break the spell. I carefully turned my head to look at him. In the soft morning light, his face was relaxed, the hard lines softened by sleep. A few strands of dark hair had fallen across his forehead. He looked peaceful, younger. His arm was a comforting weight, holding me in place, anchoring me. I could feel the steady thrum of his heartbeat against my back. A familiar anxiety began to prickle at the edges of my contentment. The morning after fear. Now that the night was over, now that the sun was up, would regret set in? Would he wake up and see me in the harsh light of day and realize he'd made a mistake? Would the magic of our strange, isolated encounter dissipate, leaving only awkwardness in its wake? This was the part one was bad at, the navigation of the after. I must have shifted because he stirred behind me. His arm tightened around my waist, pulling me closer against his chest. He nuzzled his face into the back of my neck, his stubble pleasantly rough against my skin. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I whispered back, my own voice tight with nerves. He was quiet for a long moment, and my anxiety spiked. This was it. The awkward silence. The retreat. "I woke up a few times," he said, his voice still a low rumble against my spine. "Just to make sure you were still here." The simple, honest confession shattered my fears into a million pieces. He had been just as uncertain as I was. The stoic, confident man was worried I might vanish. I turned in his arms to face him, a movement that felt both bold and necessary. His eyes fluttered open. They were a warm, clear brown in the morning light, free of the shadows and intensity of the night before. He looked at me, a slow, sleepy smile spreading across his face. "Hey you," he said softly. "Hey," I replied, a matching smile on my own lips. He reached up and gently brushed a stray piece of hair from my forehead. His touch was tender, reverent. "You're real," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "So are you," I said. We lay there for a long time, just looking at each other, the city slowly waking up outside my window. There were no grand declarations, no passionate speeches. There was just this, a quiet, profound sense of rightness. The feeling of two solitary people who had finally found their other half. It was a better feeling than any of the dramatic fantasies I had ever cooked up in my head. It was simple. It was calm. It was real. "I have to ask," I said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "The elevator. Did you?" He raised an eyebrow. "Did I what?" "Use my secret security guard powers to trap you in a metal box with me?" "Maybe," I said, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "It just seems awfully convenient." He let out a low chuckle, the sound vibrating through his chest and into mine. "I'd love to take credit for being that smooth, Leo. But no, that old car has a mind of its own. Let's just call it a happy accident." He paused, his expression turning serious again. Though I will admit, when it stopped, my first thought wasn't about getting out. "What was it?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "It was, finally," he said simply. "Just us. Just us." My heart picked up its pace. That was how it had felt. Like the rest of the world had melted away, leaving only the two of us in that small, red-lit space. I should probably make more coffee, I said, though I had no desire to leave the warmth of the bed. In a minute, he said, pulling me closer, until there was no space left between us at all. He kissed me, a slow, lazy morning kiss that tasted of sleep and new beginnings. It was a kiss that promised more minutes, more mornings, more shared silences. Later, we were in the kitchen. I was making coffee, a second pot, just as good as the first, and he was leaning against the counter, watching me. I was wearing an old t-shirt and pajama pants. He had pulled on his uniform trousers, but was still barefoot, his gray shirt unbuttoned at the collar. It was a scene of such simple, domestic intimacy that it made my chest ache with a feeling so potent it almost felt like sadness. It was the feeling of getting something you had wanted for so long you had convinced yourself it was impossible. He was watching my hands as I moved, his gaze thoughtful. I have a cabin, he said, the words seemingly coming from nowhere. Upstate. About 2 hours from here. It's quiet. I stopped what I was doing and looked at him. A cabin? Yeah. My grandfather built it. I go up there most weekends. To get away from the noise. To build things. He looked up from my hands and met my eyes. It's got a porch that looks out over the woods. The coffee tastes better up there. It wasn't just a statement. It was an invitation. An offer of a shared future, of more quiet moments, of a life outside the lonely confines of the city and the night shift. He was showing me his world, the one made of solid things, of wood and earth and quiet contemplation. I'd like that, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'd like that very much. He nodded, a small, satisfied smile on his face. He pushed himself off the counter and came to stand behind me as I was pouring the coffee. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. I leaned back against his solid chest, my hands still holding the coffee pot, and closed my eyes. For 4 years, my life had been a silent, solitary routine. I worked, I went home, I slept, and I started over. I had built a life of careful, quiet isolation, observing the world from behind a wall of my own making. I had watched Marcus from a distance, projecting my own hopes and fears onto him, making him into a symbol of everything I thought I couldn't have. But I was wrong. Love wasn't a dramatic, earth-shattering event. It was quiet. It was steady. It was a hand on your chest in a dark elevator. It was a shared cup of coffee at sunrise. It was the feeling of a strong, steady heartbeat against your back. He was right. We had stopped watching and started seeing. And as I stood there in my small kitchen, wrapped in his arms, the rich smell of coffee filling the air, I saw my future. It was quiet, and it was calm, and it was filled with him. I was no longer a ghost in the machine. I was here. I was real. And I wasn't alone. I felt like I had finally, after a lifetime of searching, come home.